Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to our Legacies of Learning book chat. I'm honored to have with me some very good friends and colleagues who I've had the pleasure of meeting and knowing, except for Ibrahim, who I haven't met just yet in person. But one day we will meet in person, Ibrahim. So I have Haroon with me. So this is the first time that I'm on a book chat with somebody who has the same name as mine, even though it's spelled slightly differently. We could talk about that later, the more authentic spelling. So we have Harun with me. Thank you for coming. We have Ibrahim here, Ibrahim Qureshi, who's joined us as well. And we have Justin, who should be joining us at some point
Mhm.
for this wonderful book chat. So this is part of the Legacies of Learning book chat, where we look at the Islamic intellectual civilization, history, education, what made scholars great of the past, what institutions, what spaces did this take place in, and how can we use that combined learning to answer some of the most important questions facing not just Muslims but civilization at a broader level. So I'm really honored that you've all made time to join us today. I'll be reading this tome that was published, but we'll give you a chance to talk about that. So thank you for being here. Welcome to our Legacies of Learning book chat.
All right, thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Wonderful to be here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So I think maybe if it's okay with you, I'll just start with a brief introduction to
Yes,
the
please do.
project.
Let our viewers know what this wonderful project that you've been working on, what seems like a long time,
Okay.
um, is all about, please.
Can I present?
Yes, of course you can. You should be able to present. Yes.
Okay, let's see. Um, I'm assuming this will give me some choices for sharing screen. Okay, so I think maybe I'm sharing. Choose content to share. Okay, what am I sharing? Oh, I see. Share this window. Aha. Okay, I figured it out.
Perfect.
Okay, so you can see this, right?
Yeah,
Ah,
Ali,
perfect.
there you go. Perfect.
Great. All right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. The Compendium of Seminary Texts project is part of a larger project that began with something called the American Society of Islamic Philosophy and Theology. Close to 5 years ago now, we well, actually, maybe it was, yeah, about 5 years ago, we received a grant from the Templeton Foundation to start this society that was centered around uh, conferences, working groups, publications about bringing tulab al-ilm, advanced graduate students, professors, scholars, people who are interested in the Aqli sciences primarily. So Islamic, theology and philosophy, kalam, falsafa, usul al-fiqh, usul al-din, the instrumental sciences, anything sort of broadly connected to the rational sciences, to bring them together for suhba, to build community, to get us out of our silos and to communicate more often, rather than write an article, write a book, let it get disseminated, let people chat about it, and maybe write another article and then find out what kind of things you could work on in your thinking and your writing. Rather, we tried to create kind of a real-time environment for students and scholars to discuss important issues in the intellectual history, but also as the topics of kalam in particular relate to the contemporary age. Can we solve certain problems? Can we address certain questions, certain issues in the Muslim community, and more broadly as well in our conversations outside the Muslim community? How can we do that through the lens of our studies of kalam and other aqli sciences, logic, etc., and engage meaningfully, actively, rather than just sort of staying limited in academic disciplines or environments. So there's a suhba orientation, creating community, and then there's a sort of khidma orientation of serving the community through trying to solve certain problems and disseminate those problems through various different means. So our working groups were online spaces. Sidi Haroon, you joined us early on in those. The pandemic had just started, so we were all on Zoom and we were all on our social media accounts and communicating that way. We had very regular communication and meetings with scholars from all around the world and students of knowledge from all around the world, from South India to California and everything in between. The Australians were usually asleep when we were meeting, but we tried our best to include them as well. So from that, we realized that a lot of us were working on curriculum development projects. A lot of us were not just doing research and writing and teaching, but also really thinking about how to bring this knowledge and these skills into our communities at various different levels, from from sort of middle school on up into the seminary level, the college level, the graduate level, and beyond. And so, alhamdulillah, we were able to then get a second grant from the Templeton Foundation to continue the work of our conferences, our working groups, and our academic publications, and then expand that into curriculum development. So in terms of the publications that we've been working on to keep it focused on the book talks, our primary publication was the Journal of Islamic Philosophy, that was started by Muhammad Hussein and Dr. Maqsood Aftab, I guess maybe 20 years ago, and we sort of brought this into our work with the society. Sidi Muhammad and Dr. Maqsood were co-founders of the American Society for Islamic Philosophy and Theology, or what we call ASIPT. And this was our primary sort of academic publication link. But then we also wanted to have a journal that was not just focused on the academic study of Islamic philosophy and theology, but also interested in bringing applied theology to the community. So with that, we were able to commission a number of articles by a number of excellent scholars and academics on topics related to Islam and philosophy, or Islam and theology. Alhamdulillah, some really, really cool stuff here in our online journal. And we may eventually bring this to print as well, just to archive it. Some of our early projects also included our comparative glossaries. One of the things that one finds that when they're trying to learn any of these disciplines, especially, you find this in usul al-fiqh, but especially in the, oops, I think I lost my screen. Shall I share screen? Oops, I'm having some issues with my... Can you still see my screen?
Oh, no, we can't see it.
No,
okay.
we can't.
I think that my I had an issue with my monitor, so let me just share screen again. I choose window and share this window. Okay, and we're back. Yeah, so one of the problems for anybody trying to study the Islamic sciences is that you realize that you can only go so far in English. At least in my experience, I didn't have a lot of teachers in the Muslim community who spoke English as their first language. So I often, anyway, so I would often end up using Arabic terms, even if the mode of instruction was English. And then when I started studying primarily in Arabic with the teachers, my Arabic, was, made it challenging for me to access the material, and you start to try to figure out, well, maybe I'll understand this better if I bring it into English. And so that sort of Anglophone learning, is also an important variable in all of this. So when you realize something like mantiq, like logic, just has so many different, conventions for the translation of terms, it's very difficult to go from the Latin scholastic tradition in the English language to the mantiq, the Arabic logic tradition. People are translating the same Arabic terms with differing English technical terms that are sometimes contradictory. It just becomes very difficult to build a bridge between the two traditions and languages. So part of the solution to that was to build this comparative glossary that one of my students from Harvard Extension School was hired. Her name was Allison Jacques, and she helped with the initial version of this. And then when Sidi Justin and Sidi Marwan Tayan joined us at the beginning of the grant, we expanded it to, I don't know, there's, what is this? 1,661 entries with comparative translations of scholars. We took people's translations and then just sort of put their translations of technical terms side by side, so we could compare and try to maybe perhaps get to a sense of best practices. And so we've done that with, I'm just moving quickly through things just to share the basics, but we've done that with a number of the sciences. We also have a few that are in the vaults that will hopefully make it to the webpage sooner than later. So this was helpful in our efforts to start translating the text under question, because it's very difficult to agree upon the proper translation for technical terms, especially in some of the sciences like rhetoric or ilm al-wada, but also in sarf and nahu. There's just differing terms that are used out there, and sometimes they're not as helpful. Sometimes they're kind of clunky English technical terms that are not totally accurately accurate for the Arabic term, because the traditions kind of grew in different ways over time. So anyway, so this was all sort of part of the problem solving of how do we get this material that's so important to our learning communities. How do we get it to them in the English language? If you're an Arabic speaker, you can go and study to the highest levels, and your mode of instruction can be in Arabic. If you're a Kurdish speaker, you can study to the highest levels, and all of your instruction is in Kurdish. In Turkish, all of your instructions in Turkish. In Urdu, all of your instructions in Urdu. But in English, it's very difficult to get that kind of training. So a lot of what we're trying to do is to help the English-speaking Tulab al-Ilm community access high-level knowledge through that mode, since not everybody gets to go and study overseas, and not everybody gets to learn the Arabic or other Islamic languages that are used as modes of instruction to a level that allows them to access the information. You end up, the Arabic language itself becomes a wall between you and the knowledge that you're trying to seek, in many cases, projecting some of my own struggles and my own weaknesses, but I think it's one that's shared by many people. So the comparative glossaries aid in that project. Let's see. We also have a book series of academic books that we're publishing. I guess we don't have. This needs to be updated, but we've published a book by Sheikh Hamza Karamali with Maulana Justin and with Sidi Marwan, which was called Discerning Religious Truth, which is a book on logic that's high level, sort of represented translation of Al-Khabisi's commentary on, help me out here, Justin, I'm forgetting the the text.
On the Tahdhib al-Mantiq.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's available with Lockwood Press. That was our first book, and then we'll have a similar text, a translation, annotation, and full representation of the text and commentary tradition of Mullah Fanari's Fawaid al-Fanariya, another text in logic. And we have a book on occasionalism by Dr. Nazif Muhtar Olu coming out. So we'll have a number of books. Sorry, 1 second. Getting a call for some reason. Okay, so we'll have a number of books coming out, at least 3, perhaps more, in the coming months, through our series in Islamic philosophy and theology with Lockwood Press. And then finally, we'll get to our curriculum and our curricular publications, which includes the Compendium of Seminary Texts. We're also producing a high school curriculum that where we're producing syllabi that integrate Islamic studies with the various different academic sciences, trying to get rid of that sort of bifurcation of Islamic studies and academics, and showing how the Islamic liberal arts that are studied in this text overlap with and complement, as well as the Quranic studies and the Hadith studies, how they overlap with and complement and harmonize with the other subjects that we study in a sort of state education system, whether it's history, whether it's science, whether it's language arts, or whatever it may be. So here we have a full high school curriculum that we've produced, and we're producing. I'm just sort of fast forwarding to the main points. So, but we're producing syllabi for each of the classes. We've got 4 levels, four grades, and we're producing integrated studies, of these subjects. We're making it freely available. We're trying to make everything open source, trying to solve problems immediately in our community, rather than putting up paywalls, rather than building businesses around it. Just trying to get the material out there as quickly as possible, so the community can begin to benefit from them. Which leads us to the compendium, which was quite a work. Actually, I have it open over here. Quite an effort over the course of about 2 years. Our team, which included CD Marwan and CD Justin and myself, and then also once we had some rough translations, we invited students and teachers to join us to read through them closely. That includes Dr. Sharifa Tubgi from Brandeis University, and a number of college students who also joined us, and some madrasa students as well. And we, over the course of about 2 years, we're able to produce this, mashallah, this tome that covers the instrumental sciences. So the grammatical sciences, logic, rhetoric, dialectics or debate, as well as like usul al-fiqh, usul al-din, and usul al-tasawwuf. So there's the idea that you first learn to read, and then you read to learn, and then you learn to critique, and that these sciences are generally laid out that way in this book to give students the foundations, the instrumental sciences, to be able to study critically the Islamic tradition, such that you can enter into the deep study of tafsir, hadith, and all the other sciences. All right, so I'm going to stop. Okay, we're back. Something happened there. I wasn't sure if you were still with me.
I think it's me just controlling it. So would you like me to remove it and just make it into a full screen once again?
No, that's fine. I just thought maybe it was just me and my screen.
No.
So, well, that's the introduction to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a little more than you wanted. Feel free to,
No, it's wonderful.
edit it
So,
out.
yeah. So my question here, and I want to bring in Justin Ibrahim as well. This has been quite a journey. What has been your experience of doing this important piece of, the pieces of work? But what's been your experience of it for people who might want to do it in the future? There's a lot of work that's happening. I know in the UK, for example, I mean, I can pick up books from my shelf which have been translations of classical texts or mutun, or books on primers, on logic, whatever. I mean, what has your experience been, and what advice can you offer for people who might want to do something similar in the future?
Should we pass that on to maybe CD Justin, who worked on the JMD in particular, or sorry, the compendium?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, one of the things is that starting the project, at least, we had a vision, and we didn't think, we thought it would take us maybe a year to finish at first, given how long the text is and how it's covering 12 sciences. So given with that, we figured that, all right, so if we give ourselves about a year to translate the text and also review the translation, we should have something substantial at the very end. And we found out that this is a much more involved process, especially if you want a very high quality translation. If you want the translation to be in idiomatic English and it's not like a translationese, it's just, and also making sure that the technical terms match up with, are faithful to the Arabic, but at the same time are in line with current standards in the sciences that, as far as we know. So for instance, like in legal studies and in, for like the usul al-fiqh text, or with other texts in logic from the Western tradition, making sure that we're not using a term, for instance, like if we're translating the word qadiyya, right? Qadiyya is a proposition. There's different ways you can translate that word. You can, you could have left it untranslated and just put, transliterate it and say qadiyya and then hope that the reader will learn it that way. Or, you can spend quite a bit of time, which we did. Imagine this for the entire text, right? Looking at all of our technical terms, other textbooks from that includes translations of Arabic texts from many scholars and educators and researchers and in English, but then also looking at any other texts that are in like logic tradition or legal tradition or tradition of dialectics from the Western text, and trying to make them match and come to a reconciliation between like all 3-4 different people all working on at the same time and saying, I think that this term is better, I think this term is better, and then resolving that. So once the actual text gets translated, then there's obviously a voice that needs to come through with the text, and that actually took quite some time, because some of us working on the project wanted something more literal translation for students. Others wanted more of an idiomatic English translation. So then we had to come to terms with, all right, we need a balance in some way. So that took quite some time, and then reviewing all the text. And then finally, the last part, so that took over a year, right? That was like a year and a half, if not a little bit more. And then finally, we did the typesetting in-house. And that took a lot of time as well. And mashallah, we do thank Marwan for his service, because he put so many hours in beyond what it was expecting to come up with this beautiful text. He did he taught himself how to use Adobe InDesign and other tools. He did a lot of the choices with the font, arranging the. For instance, when you're looking at the actual PDF, if your viewers can take a look at it when they listen to the recording, just understanding how the columns will work, and then how will we separate out sections, because there's major chapters within a text, and then under the major chapters there's like sub chapters and there's sub chapters. How do we delineate those? How do we set off technical terms? Do we use different colors, which we ended up doing? Or do we use, but when should we use italics? All of that went into this massive project. It taught us a lot about the experience of translating a text and also self-publishing it, is that it's not a very simple, I can translate a text in a few days and then just publish it. It's actually, you can do that, but you won't have a quality product. And even now, when we review the text, there's things that we want to change. Sometimes there's a typo here. It's such a long text. We realize that it will constantly be edited and updated. So that's kind of our experience so far. It took us about 2 years to complete the text. So, and there's a lot of working parts, and there's a lot of people that were involved. Mashallah, we know who they are, right? Even if we didn't get a chance to say exactly who they were, and sometimes they just popped in to give us small comments. Sometimes they're with us almost the entire way, like Dr. Sharif, mashallah. So so hopefully everybody benefits from the text, but that's our experience so far with working on it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So here's a question that I think is important from my perspective as someone who's gone through a seminary education and who still has one foot, if you like, in a seminary. That's a Darul Ulum, if you like, but also has another foot in academia. How do you envision, or have you tried getting texts like this into seminaries? I mean, it's a compendium of seminary texts. So one thing is to have the text. Another thing is then to have teachers who can teach the text and students who can read the text. And there's often a critique that I think we've talked about in other places, where in some seminaries, some of the things that are discussed in these texts are no longer given the importance or significance that they may once have had in a madrasa curriculum. So I know there's a few questions in there, but just as a conversation, I wonder if you could talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, the hope is that it will be used in seminaries. I know we're communicating with some of the Darul Uloom, at least in the U.S. And then also in Turkey. There's at least a seminary or two there that we hope are the English speaking students are using them, this particular text, because this also comes out of the Ottoman tradition, especially the texts themselves are each one of the texts within this book, like the on creedal theology or the science of embellishment. Each one of them has a source text that's directly from like the madrasa curriculum, and especially as used in the Ottoman and Kurdish Ottoman tradition. So we would refer to those texts in order to figure out what was going on in this kind of in this text that Sheikh Muhammad Amin Air had put together, um, rahimahullah. Um, but anyway, because it's based on seminary texts, classic ones that have been used for hundreds and hundreds of years that have a tradition around them, um, those are the texts are meant to be studied with commentaries, and they're meant to be studied with teachers who can access those commentaries. In the introduction, I talk about this a little bit. This idea of like you have mutala'a, the preparation reading beforehand, the deep. There's a system of deep reading called mutala'a where you're really thinking about each word. Why does the author use this word? And then you have your dars with the teacher. Where they're going to unpack the text for you, and you're going to ask questions depending on the methodology of the institution. And then after that, there's mudhakara, and at least in the madrasa that I have in mind, Sheikh Saleh al-Bursi's in Konya, called Madrasat al-Falah. They have multiple mudhakara sessions, review sessions, before they're allowed to get to their next dars. So on the text, so they have to, in groups, reteach the text to each other, review it with each other, critique the text, go to the commentaries, and see if they can figure out again why this word, why that word, what are they trying to say? Have other scholars critique this? Did other scholars critique this? The scholars who critiqued it, sort of wading into that quagmire of that happy quagmire of of the commentary tradition. And that's a skill in and of itself. This text by itself, without access to that, has its limitations. So, for example, like the text on Nahu, بحر السحو في علم النحو. What do we call it? The Tranquil Sea, yeah, on the science of grammar. Um, that text is really helpful reading it in English, reading this one in English. But it made so much more sense when I was able to compare those portions to Mulajami that I was reading with a teacher in this sort of seminary tradition. So texts are only part of the picture, right? The sheikhs have to, the teachers, even just the advanced students have to unpack them for the student, and it is returns to that challenge. Like, are there teachers who can teach it? Are there students who have the discipline to study it, especially in the West? And that's, I think, part of the challenge. But mashallah, I think the Dar al-Ulooms tend to be the places where this is most likely to happen, in at least in English speaking communities in the West. I don't know if I think that speaks to your question.
Yeah, and no, it's brilliant. Thank you. I mean, I'm just thinking about my own experiences and the sort of conversations that we're all having, I guess, around education. Um, Let me ask you a question that's really important in terms of the vision and taking this forward. What do you see as the output of all of this? So, if somebody was to study this, God willing, and or if a group of people were to study this in a madrasa or anywhere else, what would your ideal blueprint or prototype or sort of scholar would who what can you imagine as a scholar being in the West today, for example?
I'll say a few things, and inshallah, we can just invite Sidi Ibrahim's suggestion to comment as well. But I think the idea, Sheikh Muhammad Amin Air, rahimahullah, his idea with this text, which is again sort of a repurposing of seminary texts, where he just sort of filled in some things from the commentaries. It was meant to be like a one dose inoculation. Basically, it was meant to give a student the intermediate level, get them to the intermediate level that gives them a sufficient amount of knowledge of these instrumental sciences, such that they can go serve their communities as teachers, as imams, or as researchers and writers. The idea is that if you understand these texts well enough, you should be able to access the scholarly tradition in the higher level texts as well. Um, so this kind of brings us to our high school curriculum and our broader, verification and renewal curriculum. I forgot to mention that that's the name of the curriculum that we're working on. Um, the idea there is that not everybody is going to study to become an imam. Not everybody is going to study to become another madrasa teacher, right? And not everybody is going to jump from the madrasa into the academy. So the idea is like, what are the transferable skills that you learn from doing a deep study of grammar, rhetoric, logic, as well as usul al-fiqh and usul al-din and usul al-tasawwuf, etc. I think some of those transferable skills just come down to what is the purpose of a liberal arts education. I think that's why there's a lot of interest in Western Muslim communities and understanding the liberal arts education in the Latin tradition. There's a lot of overlap there. And the idea is that you do learn to when you learn to read well, and then you read and to learn, and then you learn to think, and you think to critique. You learn how to do real critical thinking. You learn how to really parse a text, whether it's a written text or if you move that into other domains of YouTube videos or wherever you're getting your knowledge from. When you've learned to think critically about any kind of messaging that's coming your way, if you've learned to identify fallacies, if you've learned to identify how rhetoric is being used to sway your your heart's inclinations, right? If somebody's using poetry or music or political rhetoric or whatever it may be to steer you towards the truth or away from the truth, to be aware of how language in particular and reasoning as well, how to use it right, and how to not be bamboozled, as Sheikh Malcolm X used to say, right? So it can create, I think, a learned critical thinker who can go out into their community, and if they become artists or they become doctors or they become lawyers or they become shop owners or whatever it may be, whatever they get into, it's a part of who they become. Any curriculum, you ask the question of what will our student become? And at this stage, these are the instrumental sciences, right? We haven't talked about all the other sciences, and so that's where, like in our high school curriculum that I was sharing earlier, our biology syllabus is integrated with epistemology, right? You have to understand that there's knowledge you can obtain with the intellect alone, with the senses and empirical observation, and with through revelation. And you have to learn how to put those those three epistemological channels in conversation with each other, and know how to harmonize them. And so all of these instrumental sciences then enter into the other subjects that they study. So you don't end up with a bifurcated, split personality of Muslim in the mosque and something else in the laboratory. And so part of this is about training students to become whole Muslims, right? And to not have that Islamic studies academics kind of approach to things, or like commerce is what it is here. We read Islamic law, we learn about Islamic finance here. Too hard. We're just going to go do whatever everybody else is doing in the marketplace. No, how do we bring Islam into our interactions in real, meaningful, seamless sorts of ways, and not just sort of identity markers, not just sort of slogans, right? But real, lived, practiced, realized, witnessed, uh, you know, um, uh, Islam, right? Through the lens of its epistemology, through the lens of the Quranic, the ayah, looking at the ayahs and everything around us and seeing signs that point to Allah. That's the big picture, the big goal. So this is only one step. The compendium is only one step for a certain group of students who might then go out and work in all these other kinds of fields. That was supposed to be a short answer. I'm sorry. Maybe CD Ibrahim would like to jump in. He's been very involved.
No, I wanted to add a little bit to what you're saying, Dr. Harun, because I think we live in a time when critical thinking is very much something that's promoted, and something that's seen as valuable, and perhaps even the key skill that a person needs to learn around their high school years. But at least in the manner that critical thinking was understood in our tradition, and the way you find it in this compendium, it's not quite the same as what it seems modernity has understood it to be, in the sense that modernity understands critical thinking, like the term suggests, as a matter of critique, as a matter of being skeptical towards points of view, as a matter of taking things that are generally that are well received, that are received traditionally in a certain society, and critiquing them, breaking them down, seeing, analyzing the degree to which these are defensible, whether they're changeable or contingent or not. I think there's another view of critical thinking, and a certain phrase that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf often says comes to mind, that the ancients would take a single sentence or a single paragraph of a book, or would take a single sentence and write an entire book on that sentence. And that's what a commentary is. And you can think of something like Sharh al-Aqad an-Nasafiyya, right? The Aqad an-Nasafiyya is a very simple work. It's if you're to print it in modern print, it'd only be a few pages long. But you take that, and now you have a couple 100-page book on simply explaining what seems like a fairly straightforward list of points of belief. And then on top of that, there are hundreds of commentaries on the details of how this this commentary was then explained. There's an entire tradition around what is effectively a few pages of writing, and fairly straightforward writing. But so this is what you consider the way of the ancients, to take what appears simple and to reveal the complexities that underlie it. Whereas it seems like the modern approach, if we're perhaps this might be a bit reductive. The modern approach is to take a large book and summarize it into a single sentence. It's the AI effect, the ChatGPT effect of taking a large and quite complex idea that's explained over the course of 400 books and writing a simple summary of it to grasp the essential points, as it were. And I think as a matter of education, there's a question of what sort of a person should we be producing? Should we be producing the type of person who reads Shakespeare and reads Julius Caesar from Shakespeare and can only produce a single paragraph summary? And you could argue that many of the way literature classes, for example, in high school are taught, oftentimes lend themselves towards this, towards a very simple summary of a quite complex text. Or would it be better to produce an individual in our education that can take a single idea and can look at all the various possibilities within this idea? And what are all the unexplored points? What are all of the wujuh, you could say, of the text, of the intention of the author that might not appear at first, but we can move beyond our initial reaction to the text and rationally look at what's possible. And right, there's a famous saying of one of their early Salaf, I don't remember it word for word, but more or less is that we don't consider a faqih, we do not consider one of us a faqih until he sees 70 wujuh in every ayah of the Quran. Right, 70 ways of extracting meanings and ahkam and different isharat and allusions from a single ayah of the Quran. And roughly that's what a liberal arts education, or an education in the instrumental sciences, especially in the way that's done in our tradition, is intended to do. You look at all the grammatical possibilities of a single sentence. You train yourself in that, and through the mudhakara that you do with your fellow classmates, you see that perhaps there is another reading, there's something else that another reader had in mind that was different from what I had in mind. And so now, because you're training yourself every sentence, you look at what are all of the 5 or 6 different readings that everyone in this group was understanding. And now we can go to the commentaries and look at are those discussed, and what are the which of these seem more likely, which of these are less likely, which of these are more correct grammatically, which of these are more eloquent, which of these are less eloquent, which of these are produce a better formulated syllogism, which of these is an argument that is valid but perhaps is more open to objection. So going through your sarf classes, your classes in morphology, going through your grammar classes in Nahu, your balagha classes, they open up realms of vision. You can see much more rhetorically once you've trained yourself in rhetoric, particularly in this manner. You can see logical possibilities in everything that you read after you train yourself in logic in this manner. And specifically through this commentary tradition that you learn to become that sort of a person, the sort of person that can look at a single statement, you can see all of the different possibilities in it. whether just going through a single text like in each of the sciences like we have in the compendium is enough for that is perhaps a bit of an overstatement, but I think it's certainly a large step in that direction, meaning in the direction of an education of that standard.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ibrahim, when you were speaking, I don't know if Justin wants to come in now. Maybe give him an opportunity if he wants to add anything.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah. So here's a question. I've been listening to what you've been saying, and there's two questions that come to my mind, and maybe they're interrelated or they're not. One is that we often hear, and especially my early education, and now that I'm in the teaching field, is that there seems to be this. It still exists this division between what we call in Urdu. I'll translate it: dini and dunyavi. So it's always difficult to translate it, but between religious and secular, or religious and otherworldly knowledge, it still exists in many Muslim communities. And I think because of that bifurcation, we sometimes find ourselves in. I mean, everyday Muslims find themselves in this difficult position because they can't quite see the relevance of their work with their religion. And this has been, I mean, even in popular discourse, you hear this, but even in sometimes in scholarly circles as well, you hear about this division between the deen and dunyawi knowledge, and how that may or may not impact how Muslims see the world, and how it might, how if we can free ourselves from that, that might be useful. But the second thing is what you've been saying about this wujuhat, these different perspectives, and I want to think about how, or talk about how, having this wujuhat, where does it come from? Because sometimes you hear Muslims have a black and white disposition on certain, whether it's to do with theological or more often to do with legal or fiqhi positions, or anything else for that matter. People have this almost like this secular positivistic worldview where there can only be one right answer and everybody else is wrong. And of course, from what you've been explaining and what I've been reading, that's not entirely true. So where does this come from? What can we do? I mean, your project is doing some work in that area, but this secular religious divide and this sort of, I don't want to use the word ambiguity, but maybe that's the right word, where Muslims should, what historically were ambiguity tolerant, when it came to different perspectives to reading text or even understanding one another.
I mean, I can jump in and then
Yes,
pass the mic, whatever. Yeah. I think the deen, like dini versus dunyawi sciences, right? Like it's a helpful divide if we think like there's the religious sciences when we talk about tafsir and hadith and so on, and then if you're becoming an architect or a doctor or something, you put that in a different category. But I think another just a helpful way to look at it is something that's dunyawi when there's nothing in it for Allah, right? So when you ask yourself, what's in it for Allah if I'm a baker, right? If you're only in it just to make money, and perhaps you don't even you're not even thinking about like you're living as something that is potentially full of blessings and that you can help, you're supporting your family, you're fulfilling an obligation. If you're only interested in the money and you're not even thinking about the fact that earning a living, supporting your family, all the things all the good things you can do with that money, paying zakat on it, giving in sadaqah, if you're only just thinking about how much money am I going to make this year, and you're not thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of that, then it's a dunyawi pursuit. But if that same baker is saying Bismillah and doing dua and dhikr over the food that they're making, and they're intending that money to support their family, and they're thinking about doing dawah in this, if they're outside, especially outside the Muslim country, but even in the Muslim world, dawah to non-Muslims and all the people who've left Islam, as well as people who are just sort of distant from it. So many opportunities in everything you do to make it to make that action for the sake of Allah. And so nothing's dunyawi if it's a halal. If we're in the realm of the halal, you can move something that's neutral and dunyawi into the realm of the recommended, to the mandub, with intent, with a sincere intention. And so, I mean, that's one way of just avoiding the dini dunyawi divide. but it all comes down to ikhlas, like ikhlas niyya. So what is having a sincere intention to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any particular role that you find yourself in. And then it ceases to be dunya from that perspective. But then also, what we see anybody who digs deeply into these sciences, or I would say many people who dig deeply into these sciences, not just as a means of like learning, passing the test, and getting the degree, but really starts making connections. When you're really immersed in a science, you see it everywhere, right? I was a music student before I was Muslim. I went to a music school and I started doing all this ear training. Uh, every time I'd hear two different car horns, I started to recognize the intervals between them. If you're an artist, you start to see the designs. If you're an architect, you see your science everywhere, and so you start making connections. So when you study grammar deeply, you're going to see that there are other grammars out there, right? Logic is a grammar of the mind, and grammar is a grammar of the tongue. But then there's also systems all around you. There's a grammar of nature. There's a grammar in architecture. You're going to start to see how systems work together, and so if you start looking deeply into any subject, you find there's going to be transferable skills, transferable insights. If you're thinking in those terms, not everybody thinks in those terms. Not everybody gets immersed in a science. But I mean, I've seen like sheikhs talk about. So for example, like hadith methodology and usul al fiqh, we get concepts like mutawatir transmission, right? You can take that and look at blockchain technology and think about how that relates to water transmission, right? Gaining certainty through massive numbers of narrations and transmissions. That's as a sort of a simple understanding of it. I was talking to Sheikh Talal, one of our mutual teachers, the other day, and he was making all these connections to hadith methodology and signal flow in audio engineering, right? So if you dig deeply and you continue to think deeply about anything you're studying, you're going to see correlations and overlaps. So I think that's another way to get past the dini dunyawi divide, intention, and then also just transferable skills and insights. I forgot the second half of your question, but that's the dini dunyawi part.
The second one was the ambiguity tolerant aspect, which is the wujuhat, I guess, in some ways.
I'll just say quickly, then I'll pass it on. That's anybody who digs deeply into the usuli sciences, especially, and even just studying fiqh. Like you want to study fiqh. Many people, converts and others who went on this search for sacred knowledge, who were inspired by people like Sheikh Hamza and Imam Said and so on. You go to study sacred knowledge. You sit down, you study fiqh, and you find like a whole bunch of differences of opinion about how to wash your hands for wudu, or how to do a sinja or something like that. Like you're like, where is the spirituality? Where is all the depth? And you get caught up in all these aqwal. Um, uh, but the thing that you realize when people have these oversimplified ideas about Muslims just sort of becoming more and more narrow and just becoming so taqlidi that they just became hollow shells who only quoted from the past. The reality is every single bab in a fiqh book, every single chapter in a fiqh book, even just like these sort of introductory commentaries, there's just so many differences of opinion that you sort through in every single mas'ala and every single inquiry, that you're like, well, where is this like blind following? Where is this oversimplification? I can't even get out of the bab at tahara, like the chapter on purification, without having to consider so many different perspectives. Of course, if you're not properly trained for that, that gets very frustrating. But from another angle, it's just evidence that people are really thinking deeply about every single claim to make sure that it's that they're seeking truth and that they're getting close to the truth, and they're not going to just take one scholar's opinion without really thinking deeply through it. Even the lower level scholars, the people who couldn't do ijtihad. So if you have any familiarity with the tradition, then you realize that it's extremely tolerant of difference of opinion. It's a very, very wide road. You have small matters of consensus, and then you have ikhtilaf. You have these areas of disagreement that are broad, and sometimes you get some kind of rare nadir kinds of opinions or shadh opinions, right? But in the middle there, there's just a sea of possibilities on so many different issues, and that creates more tolerant people when you realize, like, there isn't just, in the simplest terms, there isn't just one way to hold your hands while you're praying. There isn't just one way, there's not just one opinion on what's sunnah and what's what's fard or something in some aspects of your wudu, or when to break your fast or something like that. There can be legitimate kind of different. You become more tolerant when you realize those sort of differences. But I think there's a fear that if you expose people to that too much, they're just going to get relativistic. Well, what's certain? And that's where you focus on the ijma. That's why when we talk about Islam, I think we should be talking about, it should be ijma forward and ikhtilaf kind of in the background, just to show the diversity, right? So we unify on those areas of ijma, and then the sea of ikhtilaf, the sea of scholarly disagreement, allows for spaces to be tolerant. That was my whole research in my book on al-Bajuri. That was sort of my study of the of the um, of the Islamic tradition. So anyway, those are my thoughts. CD Justin or
Yeah.
CD Harold. Sorry.
Let's see what you have to add. See Ibrahim or see Justin. Please come in.
Yeah. I think I remember several years ago. This is just after I started studying Kalam and Mantiq. I was reading Descartes' discourse method. I believe it's called it. It's where he lays out his project of skepticism. And for those who aren't familiar, his project of skepticism essentially begins with the idea that we should question all of our knowledge, and we should be skeptical of everything that we believe, and that we should go back to a blank slate, as it were, and begin anew, and begin to rebuild our conclusions from the blank slate, because all of the inherited conclusions that we have are that, unless we have critically analyzed them, that they are unproven. They're just assumptions, and that if they remain just assumptions, then to consider that knowledge is quite, is presumptuous to call that knowledge. That's just opinion, as it were. And he continues when he begins to discuss how to implement this method, and he's speaking about his own way of conducting this method. Many of his conclusions hinge on the fact that, because we cannot know things with absolute certainty, with not only what we call yaqeen in our tradition, but what you would call wujub aqli, like with rational necessity. That if things are not known with rational necessity, then there is a level of dubitability in them. There's a level of doubt that can creep in, and if it's logically possible to doubt something, then we don't have knowledge of that thing. And I think this, in many ways, embodies the modern skeptical mind, that unless everything is held to the highest standard of certainty and of necessity, that we should just, throw it in the bin, as it were. It's like we can't know it. It's completely subjective. It's something that's open to interpretation, or something that we can change, or it results in a endless ikhtilaf, right? Endless discord and dissent amongst different people, and that that there's no knowing it, as it were. But I think what you find, again, through this compendium in our tradition, there's an understanding of levels of probability, that perhaps we can't know things to the level of necessity in all cases, but we can know things with high probability, or we can know things with, it's likely the case that such and such is true, but there are other possibilities. Or you can say that something is certain insofar as there's no opposing evidence. But theoretically, it's possible that there is opposing evidence to what I believe, but I haven't found it, and so in that sense, there's a type of practical certainty that's that we reach. I think, like Dr. Harun sort of alluded to, largely you see this in our study of usul and of fiqh as well, where you see layers of probability, different meanings being intended in different ayats of the Quran and in the ahadith. And so that creates, I think, like you said, a culture of ambiguity. Perhaps isn't the best word, but a culture of nuanced thinking about levels of knowledge that we have about things. Do right? Do we, um, uh, uh, on one hand, a person can ask, do we turn on the stove to boil water based on the certainty that the water is the thing that's giving existence to the boiling? Well, Descartes would argue, and many skeptics likewise, that well, we don't actually know it. We don't actually know what the relationship between the two are, and so we don't know. Perhaps it'll happen. Perhaps it won't. That's a skeptical position. But in our traditions, this belief in occasionalism didn't lead to skepticism. It led to a recognition. Well, there's a practical certainty that when we boil water, that when we turn on the stove, the water will in fact boil. Now, whether the metaphysical basis of that perhaps is not as clear, but certainly the practical consequence of event B following event A, the water boiling following the turning on of the stove, that we recognize as a pattern that has happened in the past in our own experience, and that is likely to continue into the future. In other words, it's the fact that we cannot prove with necessity that the water will boil does not give us justification to conclude that we don't know if it will boil. Rather, what it leads to is a probable knowledge rather than a lack of knowledge altogether. And so, again, I think what you see with a lot of these tool sciences is that they give you measures. They give you different way, a more nuanced way of measuring meanings, measuring possibilities of interpretation. And in the absence of that, if we have a scholarly class or a class that leads the community that doesn't have this training in this type of nuance, then that simple-mindedness, that black and white approach, like you said, will also reflect in the community.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time, so I have one question. If you could continue this project, and I hope you will, or when you can continue this project, where do you see it going? Where would you want to see it going 10 years from now? Somebody's watching this, some students are watching this, maybe there's someone who's interested in what you're saying, they want to support you. Where do you see it in 10 years from now, even longer than that?
Maybe CD Justin can answer that one. I'd be happy to, of course. But
yeah. So I guess speaking about the various types of projects that we have going on, at least for now, we can speak about I can touch on the VRC, or the verification renewal curriculum. I mean, there's so many different parts to this like larger curriculum project, which definitely probably the most important one that comes to mind, aside from our currently continuing to develop the curriculum in general, and then also the syllabi. But definitely one is to produce a catalog of texts, a catalog of textbooks ranging from ultimately K to 12, but let's now, it's we can try to think like 9 through 12, at least here in the States, right? So 9 through 12 is like, secondary school, and the college prep. So what we see is that in other traditions, like Memorial Press, for instance, is a Catholic-based homeschooling tradition. They've produced over the past 20 to 30 years an entire catalog of texts that range from science texts, that covers math, that covers biology, chemistry. They have physics texts that they've edited or modified, or they've written from the very beginning. They have text on logic. They have readers for literature, etc. So something like that, we would love to produce something, some type of catalog that's similar, where it's sustainable and it's feasible, and we have experts writing these texts for 9th through 12th grade, so that even if one is not in a brick and mortar home school, because we don't know what the future will be like. I don't know if everybody's going to be online at some point, right? But even homeschoolers, co-ops, that everybody will have the option to use these texts that are integrated with Islamic values and Islamic worldview. So when one is studying chemistry, they're constantly thinking about the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the cone, like in the universe, while they're doing a chemical reaction. Or when they're reading Shakespeare, or they're reading Edgar Allan Poe, or they're reading, The Great Gatsby, great, literature, or they're reading something from Malcolm X and, listening to his speeches. They're taking in all of this literature, but at the same time, they're interpreting it as a Muslim. And that's what we would love to see. Just like the Catholics and the Christians have done, this is what we should be doing. This is what I kind of see in the future, in the next 10 years. I hope, inshallah.
Could I add a little to that, or should we?
You feel free to add if you have anything you want to add.
Sure. Yeah. So, and then past the high school level as well. There's for the advanced seminary curriculum. I think there's a lot we can offer to madaris that are still that are really ensuring that these traditional texts and methods of teaching and studying are continuing to be taught. But I think the hope is perhaps we can also provide some useful contributions that will help with maybe preservation, help with transmission, making education, making that knowledge and method more broadly available. But then also showing how the knowledge can be integrated, so that if you do graduate from a seminary, but you don't have any geography training, or you don't have any history beyond a very narrow sort of focus on history, if you haven't really done world history, if you haven't studied literature comparatively across different cultures, it may be that we can also help. I think the madrasa brings the tools that we need and the knowledge that we need, and then but it also without any really, without there being, how do I put this? I don't want to be critical. I haven't seen everything, but there's been a lot of talk about how do we bring the madrasa, the traditional curriculum, and modernity, or the contemporary world, these educational traditions together. There's all the talk of Islamization of knowledge and whatever it may be, but I think there's if we just stay focused on our basic epistemology and usul, like usul al-fiqh and usul al-din kinds of techniques, and we start to bring our historiography from the hadith tradition into the study of history. It doesn't need to actually be so complicated, and we have all the tools available to us, and we can really do some amazing integration, such that you could graduate from a madrasa and study biology and science. You can still get a biology degree, or econ degree, or whatever, and you'll have tools to integrate, as opposed to it's sad to see when people have this great training in the madrasa, they're not prepared, they go to college, and they go all over the place, because they don't actually know how to apply their knowledge. So I think one of the things that we can help with as well, past the high school level, and perhaps past the madrasa, at the higher levels of the madrasa and beyond, is to bring some of this work of integrating the sciences through epistemology, through usul al-fiqh, through usul al-din, into the madaris as well. So,
Thank you.
sure.
I think we've run out of time, and I know you have other commitments, so I'm very honored. So I want to say on behalf of the Legacy of Learning project team, for giving us your time. I know you're extremely busy. I wish you all the best with all your work that you're doing, and hopefully there'll be opportunities for us to collaborate, perhaps, because there's a lot of overlap in what you've done and what you're doing, what we're hoping to do. And so please watch this space. As for our viewers, I just hope that you'll find this useful. There's lots to be said, lots to be discussed, and please do share this content. We'd love to hear from you. With that, I'd like to thank Haroon, Ibrahim, and Justin for giving us their time and for elaborating for us the important work that they're doing. Thank you so much to all of you.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
You're welcome.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khairan.
It's too short though, CD. Too short. We need another couple more hours.
We need a few more hours.